the access to the hole on the front bank is like really terrible. I also noticed that for some reason the threads in the case where the bolt must screw in to meet the divot in the crank on the right side are not quite as smooth as the threads on the left side. So I'm going to try to get the cam pin in first, just like we did in the front bank, just because it's a little bit easier to install. I tell you to come, get back in this. There you go. Thing still fraction, so maybe a degree or so forward. Problem is here, right here, there is some spring tension, maybe from the valve train in the rear bank or something, that's trying to push that's trying to rotate everything forward, and getting it lined up exactly is a bit tricky. Getting even enough access to push the pin into the hole is proving to be difficult. Okay, the pin is in here, so let me see if I check if the pivot is lined up on this guy. At least visually it looks like we're slightly off. Okay, so I can see that with the cam timing pin inserted, the crank boss or divot does not perfectly line up with the hole to where I can insert the tool and lock it. So when I put it back, I'm going to have to put it in perfectly, but for now this is fine. So we'll have to move the angle alignment a little bit while we're putting all of this back. So right now the timing pin or tool I built in place of the factory timing pin is inserted, and let me get some light here, is inserted, and you can see it's going into the cam cap there. But if I come down here and I look, I'm not sure this will come through in the camera. I hope it does, but you can see that it is slightly misaligned, like maybe a degree or two. So I'm gonna actually see where the timing is when I actually align this and lock the crankshaft. Maybe let's give it a shot. Now I'm able to see that this is perfectly aligned. Let me see if I can get that on camera. So I should be able to screw the bolt in. That should mate up with it, and it should lock the crankshaft essentially. But now I suspect the pin will not line up. So I just about can't get the pin to go in now. Alright? Yeah. It touches the cam cap, but it does not go in. So when we're putting it back, we can line everything back up. But for now, this is going to have to do. So I'm going to pull this bolt/tool out now Now I'm essentially going to spin the engine over 180 360 degrees to get um, the other cam bolt into an accessible position so that we can take it off. I installed the motion flow gear jammer. And bringing the other cam bolt back into position. Okay, so I locked the crank both by putting the gear jammer there in the anti-clockwise direction, as well as putting the bolt tool that we made just now. So looking back at the manual, it basically tells us to remove these three now, this cam cap and this other end of this oil pipe. So let's go ahead and do that. Next, the manual says to install this guy. Because it's been sitting for a while, I'm gonna give it a good wipe down. Finagling this thing might be a little bit challenging. Let's get the harder to access bolt in first. I want to make sure, absolutely sure, that I'm not cross-threading it, so I'm taking it back off. It was starting to get more resistance than I'm comfortable with. You know what? I'm not going to even torque it down any more than that. Let's just leave it where it is. Cross-threading that is totally not worth trying to push this bolt down. 100% not worth. So I'm trying to push the cam gears onto the cam holding tool. So we need to get it far enough to where we can lock it with this guy. I think this is the best it's going to get, at least with the access I have right now. I can't get this gear pushed over anymore, but I'm fairly confident it is sitting on the gear holder tool. It's just not all the way over. Just gonna have to deal with that, I guess. So since the cams are in the correct position, there is like no valve spring pressure on the cams themselves. So these come off a lot easier. This is definitely a much better way of doing it. So just a reminder, these 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, they have copper washers under the head of the bolt. In either case, I don't pull any of the bolts out of the cam caps when I'm taking it off. So the copper washers are retained by the bolts themselves. But if you do choose to pull these out, be sure to get the copper washers and keep track of where they are. Sometimes it can take a little bit of force to get the cam caps to release, just because all the tolerances are so tight. I'm just slowly working the cam cap back and forth, using the bolts as a little bit of leverage to try and get it to release. It's slowly starting to move more and more. I don't know if it's coming through on the camera, but you can definitely feel it start to move more and more as you play with it. I want to take it off as vertically away from the cams as possible to avoid scratching the cam journals. So it looks like the cam is still attached to this cam gear. Yeah, finally got it to seat all the way on there. Jesus. Yeah, this journal looks great. This one is pretty good, but the one right at the end has a groove in it. I can catch my fingernail on that, so that is definitely bad kind of wear. Something has gone through there. Not happy with that. On the exhaust cam, the two journals actually look pretty much fine. It's a little bit of wear, but nothing very concerning. All the buckets look really good. I have the cams laid out in the same order that they came off. Sorry, the cam caps. Now, this should be the matching part to that groove. This not nearly as bad. Still has some wear in it. Still has a groove, but the groove is not something I can catch my fingernail on in this case. There is some wear on this one as well. This one looks basically brand new. Pretty good. Looking at the cam journals themselves, yeah, both the journals on the exhaust look fine, just like the caps. The cams look great, no issues. Tiny bit of wear on the back of this journal. Yeah, there's a groove on this journal. I don't know if you can see it. Yep. So overall seems like a small amount of material has gone through this engine. I don't know if it's because of the stock air filter being so bad. I hope this rate of wear does not continue. Yeah, this bike is very, very well taken care of. Gets oil changes, I don't know, like 1500 2000 miles at most, usually sooner. I run 300V on it, 1040. Yeah, everything gets done earlier than scheduled maintenance. Hopefully this is only a case of changing that filter and will be better. I hope so, at least. Let us measure the shims. Actually, in this case we can measure and fit the new shims. So I'm going to take my gloves off for this and just use my bare hands, because it's easier to manipulate a tiny little shims. Make sure I'm not dropping them into the engine or something dumb like that. I'm going to go ahead and clean this gasket material off the mating surface while I have the chance and the access. We'll also do that on the rear bank and on the stator cover side. So everything should be ready to get the new gasket and go back together when the time comes. I'm done cleaning this head, so I got it basically as clean as I can. It's pretty much spotless. I got all the old gasket material out. If you do choose to use a steel razor blade like I did, be very careful that you only use it absolutely parallel to the edge and you don't gouge any of the sealing surface. This is a perfectly machined surface, and if you put any gouges in it, you'll create a path for the oil to leak out. Most of the work was done with just brake cleaner and microfiber cloth. I just used the razor blade to get the big chunks off. There's obviously still some silicone sealant stuck on the insides where the factory applied it, and I got as much of it out as I can, but the rest I'm going to leave in there. It's much better to have it stuck to the inside than be swimming around in the oil. So all this is pretty firmly stuck on any loose pieces I have removed. Moving on to the side case. Okay, I have both these surfaces cleaned up to the best of my ability. Obviously, there's still a little bit of sealant embedded in the on the mating surfaces, but that should be fine. In either case, we're going to replace this with a gasket. We're not going to be putting 3-bond again, except for where the case halves meet, front and back. So because it's always good practice to put a little bit of sealant anytime you have 3 different mating surfaces um, that are meeting at a certain point. It's very high chance of leakage in places like that, so it's always a good idea, even if you're using a gasket, to put just a dab of silicone on there. All right, so we had at least what I hope is the final parts order coming. So we've got the air filter, couple of 0.22 shims. The part numbers for the shims are linked or are in the post that's linked to the bottom of the video. We have some intake manifold clamps from AF1. I think these are like from a Suzuki or something like that. And the cam gear bolts. So we should be able to put everything back together and start reassembly today. So as well as the The other thing I did do was stick this M6 bolt in here so that the scissor gears don't kick out. I'm gonna try to see what the best position for this is. It had been suggested in a couple of the guides that a 6mm pin should be used, but this M6 bolt seems to work fine. I might try and put a longer one maybe. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, nice and seated. It's even all around, and it's past the little lip, or most of it is past the lip. So when it gets compressed, yeah, it should seal properly. So for now, I am going to leave the same copper washers on that came off of the that we took off. But once we measure the clearances and I'm sure everything is kosher, I'm going to change to the new copper washers. That's another mistake I made when assembling the first head. So since you saw me push the exhaust cam down, and that fully engaged the intake cam gear, and that released the scissor gear, and I could pull the M6 bolt out. I suspect if the pin was a better fit, it would be easier to put these back. However, you can see I'm only using my hand to tighten these cam cap bolts. I'm not drawing them down with the force of any bolts or anything like that. Also going really slow and making sure the sharp edges of the cam caps are not scratching anything. I want all the bolts to touch down without any pressure. So all the bolts are at the point where the heads are touching, but they're not any tighter than that. There is still some gap between the cam cap and the surface of the head. I'm going to slowly start drawing these down using a small ratchet. Okay, now I'm going to start torquing these down, and again it's going to be in stages. I think I'll probably do 50 inch-pounds first and then the final torque value. So, 2 passes at 97 inch-pounds for all of these guys. Now we're ready to move this cam gear back onto the cam and get it bolted in. I'm going to reuse the old cam bolts for doing this, just because if we need to adjust the clearances again, I want to put the new cam bolts in only when we are sure everything's adjusted correctly. So I'm going to put these in, then we'll measure the clearances as they are now, and if everything is good, we'll put the new cam bolts in, as well as swap out the copper washers for these 4 bolts. I'm going to put the final cam cap on with the oil pipe, and then we will do that. So I'm going to have to loosen this guy off a little bit for that. Again, I'm choosing not to change these O-rings. They seem perfectly fine and pliable. Okay, now that everything is on, I'm gonna get the cam timing pin tool that we made, put in there so that the timing is perfect. So I haven't removed the crank timing pin from the crankshaft since we put it in, so I know the crank is perfectly aligned. Now I'm going to align the cam and we should be all set. Yeah, cam timing pin is through and it's in the cam cap. I left the crank timing pin in here, so it should be perfect. But let's put the cam bolts on. We'll take the pin off, take another visual look into the crank timing pin hole and make sure it's correct. that should be tight enough for now, for us to get everything together. I'm taking off the gear jammer tool. Pin is through, bolt is tightened, and the divot on the crank. Let me see here. The divot on the crank should be perfectly lined up. It's probably really hard to see it on camera, but I'm gonna rotate it till the other bolt comes into view. I'm gonna install the gear jammer. Gear jammer off. I'm gonna give it a couple of rotations and just feel that there's no binding, everything feels correct. No funny noises, everything rotates smoothly, no binding, just barring the engine over. Okay, everything feels great. Now I'm going to remeasure all the clearances and make sure they're all in spec.